The hum of the spacecraft's engines had barely faded when he stepped onto the small platform, feeling the cold metal under his boots. The mission had been long, exhausting, and dangerous, stretching across months of careful planning and unpredictable events. Every day had felt like a tightrope walk between life and death, and yet somehow he had survived it all. He had returned with a sense of relief, thinking that his duty had been completed, that he could finally take a moment to breathe and process everything that had happened. He walked slowly down the narrow corridor of the outpost, the soft blue lights above casting a calm glow on the walls. Around him, the base was quiet. Most of the crew had already retired after the long weeks of preparation and the intense mission. A few scattered figures moved quietly in the distance, checking equipment or reviewing data, but no one paid much attention to him. He liked that. He liked the silence after chaos. It felt almost sacred, a moment to gather his thoughts. As he reached the command center, he paused to look back over the space he had left behind during the mission. Memories of the journey flooded his mind: high-speed maneuvers through asteroid fields, tense negotiations with unfamiliar alien species, and moments when a single wrong decision could have ended everything. He had learned to rely not just on his skills but also on his instincts, the small voice inside that often guided him toward safety. He remembered the fear, the adrenaline, and the small sparks of joy when things went right. He had expected the debrief to be the final step. The commander would congratulate him, ask for his report, and then he could finally rest. But just as he reached the terminal, a small, secure communication screen lit up with a new message. The insignia on the screen was unfamiliar, sleek, and official. The tone of the message was urgent. He frowned, sensing that this was not a routine follow-up. His heart skipped a beat, a mix of curiosity and anxiety rising inside him. Something told him this was no ordinary call. He activated the screen, and the holographic image of a uniformed officer appeared. The officer's face was serious, eyes sharp and calculating. "We need you back," the officer said, voice steady but firm. "The situation has changed. Your mission is not yet complete. Immediate return is required." He blinked. For a moment he could not speak. He had expected the mission to be over, to step back from danger, to breathe and reflect. But now, here, was a new call, demanding that he return to a situation that he thought was resolved. His mind raced. What could have changed? Was someone in danger? Had something gone wrong that only he could fix? The officer continued outlining the new developments. There had been unexpected complications on a distant planet, involving the very alien species they had been negotiating with during the mission. Intelligence suggested that the situation was delicate, and his specific skills and experience made him uniquely suited to address it. The officer's tone was calm, but unmistakably serious. Every word reinforced the idea that this was not a simple task. It was urgent, complex, and potentially dangerous. He ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything. He had faced danger before, had made tough decisions under pressure, but this felt different. It was personal somehow, as if the mission itself had a life of its own and was now pulling him back in. The thought of going back immediately filled him with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The human mind was an odd thing in moments like this. Part of him wanted to refuse, to stay in the safety of the base, to take a moment for himself. Yet another part of him felt the undeniable pull of duty, of responsibility, of curiosity that he could not ignore. He thought about the people he had met on the mission, the allies and friends, the creatures and beings he had barely understood at first, but had grown to respect. He thought about the risks he had taken, and the small victories that had kept him moving forward. And then he realized that this callback was more than just a continuation of duty. It was a test of everything he had learned, a chance to see if he could rise to the occasion once more. His decision was made in a heartbeat, though not without careful thought. He would return. He would face whatever awaited him, no matter how uncertain. The mixture of fear and determination settled into a strange sense of clarity. There was no turning back now. He had to go forward. The officer's voice, firm but understanding, reminded him that the choice was never just about survival. It was about the bigger picture, about the lives, alliances, and futures that depended on his actions. As he packed his gear, he felt the familiar rhythm of preparation, the checking of equipment, the double-checking of supplies, the methodical organization of tools that could mean the difference between success and failure. Every motion, every small detail mattered, and yet, underneath it all, his mind kept drifting to the unknown. What awaited him this time? Who would he meet? And why did the mission feel so personal, almost as if it had a pulse of its own? Finally, ready and equipped, he took one last look at the outpost. The quiet hum of the base, the soft glow of the lights, and the distant stars beyond the windows. All of it felt different now. He was not returning merely to continue a mission. He was stepping into something larger, something that could change everything he thought he knew about his journey and the universe itself. With a deep breath, he stepped into the shuttle, feeling the familiar shudder as it lifted off. The engines roared to life, and the platform beneath him faded into the distance. As the stars stretched out before him, he could not shake the feeling that this mission would test him in ways he had never imagined. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he arrived at his destination, everything would change. The mission was no longer just about duty, it was about connection, trust, and an unexpected bond that would leave a mark on his life forever. The shuttle landed smoothly on a platform that shimmered under the soft glow of alien lights. The outpost he had left behind now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a world that was both breathtaking and completely unfamiliar. Everything about this place was designed with precision, elegance, and an almost otherworldly sense of balance. The walls glowed with soft colors that shifted subtly, like the surface of a calm lake reflecting sunlight. The air was thick with a faint, sweet scent he could not identify, and the soft hum of machinery seemed almost musical, like it was part of the environment rather than just technology. As he stepped out of the shuttle, he could feel the weight of expectation pressing gently against him. This was no ordinary mission. The urgency in the officer's voice earlier had hinted at something unusual, and now, standing in this alien space, he understood why. Every detail, the silence, the architecture, the subtle energy in the air, spoke of power, intelligence, and careful control. He knew instinctively that he was entering the presence of someone who was not only highly respected, but deeply influential. A corridor led him forward, lined with walls that seemed almost alive. Smooth surfaces reflected his movement in strange, shifting ways as if the walls themselves were observing him. At the end of the corridor, a large chamber opened up, its scale and design unlike anything he had seen before. It was vast yet intimate, filled with soft light and shadows that played across the room like living art. At its center stood the alien queen. She was unlike any being he had ever encountered. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a gentleness to her movements that felt almost human. Her eyes were large and luminous, reflecting intelligence and curiosity in equal measure. She did not wear the heavy armor or ceremonial robes he had expected. Instead, her attire flowed gracefully, accentuating her authority without overwhelming it. Her posture was straight, dignified yet relaxed, suggesting a confidence that came from experience, wisdom, and control. As he approached, the guards around her subtly shifted back, creating space. It was a small gesture, but it immediately told him that he was being treated differently. These beings were known for their strict protocols, their unwavering loyalty to the Queen. For them to give him room without hesitation meant that the Queen herself had intervened. A mix of surprise and respect washed over him. He had been in tense situations before, but this felt unlike anything he had encountered. The air between them was charged with anticipation, yet calmness lingered underneath, as if the room itself was waiting for a single moment to unfold. The Queen stepped forward slightly, her movements deliberate and graceful. Her gaze held him, not with judgment but with curiosity. He realized that this was no ordinary diplomatic encounter. There was a connection here, subtle yet undeniable, as if she recognized something unique in him. The thought made his heart race, not out of fear but from a strange sense of anticipation. He had spent years training for missions, preparing for unexpected situations, but this personal encounter, was something he had never imagined. She spoke, her voice clear and melodic, yet carrying an authority that left no room for misinterpretation. He did not understand the words at first, but the tone conveyed meaning perfectly. It was welcoming but not casual, commanding but not harsh. Even without comprehension, he could feel the weight of her attention, the careful calibration of her gestures and expressions. It was a language in itself, one that transcended words. As she repeated her greeting in a form he could understand, he finally spoke, introducing himself formally, explaining his role, his experiences, and his reason for returning. She listened, without interruption, head slightly tilted, eyes fixed on him in a way that made him feel both exposed and acknowledged. There was no judgment, no condescension, only recognition. And with that recognition came a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had been building since he arrived softened slightly, replaced by curiosity and a sense of cautious connection. The Queen then gestured toward a seating area, inviting him to follow. The room adjusted subtly to their movement, lights dimming and soft, warm hues filling the space. He noticed the attention to detail, the way the environment seemed to respond to them, as if it was attuned to their presence. They sat facing each other, a respectful distance maintained. Yet the energy in the room made it clear that this was not a simple formal meeting. Something more profound was at play. For several moments they remained silent. He could feel the weight of her gaze, thoughtful and patient. He realized that in this silence there was a communication deeper than words. Her eyes conveyed awareness, intelligence, and an understanding that went far beyond anything he had encountered in human interactions. He felt a shiver run through him, not fear, but awe. He had met leaders, diplomats, and commanders before, but this encounter was different. There was a depth here, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it, that drew him in without force. Finally, she spoke again, and this time he could understand every word. She asked questions, not about the mission itself, but about him, about his thoughts, his feelings, his decisions, and what he had seen during his journey. The questions were precise, insightful, and sometimes uncomfortable. They forced him to reflect on actions he had taken for granted, to consider consequences he had never fully understood. At the same time, there was an unmistakable warmth in her tone, a sense that she wanted him to be honest, to reveal the parts of himself he usually kept hidden. He answered carefully, yet openly. He spoke of challenges, of fear, of moments when he had doubted himself. He spoke of hope, of determination, and of the small victories that had kept him moving forward. The Queen listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally tilting her head, as if piecing together a puzzle that only she could fully see. With every answer, he felt a subtle shift, a growing understanding that this was no ordinary encounter. There was a bond forming, quiet but powerful, built on trust, shared experience, and mutual recognition. As the conversation continued, the guards remained at a respectful distance, their presence more symbolic than necessary. The Queen's focus was entirely on him, and he realized that this attention was rare and significant. It was a recognition of not just what he had done, but who he was. The thought left him both humbled and strangely comforted. He had faced countless dangers, made life and death decisions, and yet here in this chamber, it was not his achievements that mattered most. It was his presence, his integrity, and his willingness to stand in the unknown. By the end of the session, he felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had traveled far, faced danger, and returned to a world he barely understood, yet he had been welcomed in a way that transcended ceremony and protocol. The Queen's presence had left a mark on him, a quiet awareness that this mission, this encounter, was about more than duty. It was about connection, respect, and the subtle recognition of value across species, worlds, and experiences. As he prepared to leave the chamber, he felt a strange reluctance, as if stepping away would break something delicate yet vital. The Queen's gaze followed him, steady and unyielding, and for a moment he thought he saw a faint, almost imperceptible smile. A silent message passed between them: acknowledgement, trust, and the unspoken promise of more to come. He walked back to the shuttle, the corridor and platform now feeling different than before. The world outside was vast, mysterious, and full of possibilities he had never considered. And deep inside, he realized that the Queen's recognition, the subtle bond forming, had changed something fundamental in him. He did not yet know what the future held, but he sensed that this mission, this recall, was the beginning of a journey far greater than he could have imagined. The air in the chamber felt different now. After their initial conversation, it was quieter, almost as if the room itself was holding its breath. He had expected formality, protocols, and distance, but what he found instead was a strange, unexpected intimacy. The Queen stood in front of him, her presence commanding yet calm, and for the first time, he noticed the subtle ways she studied him, not with suspicion, not with curiosity alone, but with a kind of awareness that seemed to see far deeper than the surface. She reached out her hand slowly, deliberately, and for a moment he froze. It was a gesture unlike any he had experienced before. No one had ever reached out to him with such purpose, such intention, without a shield of formality. The Queen's hand was delicate yet firm, her fingers long and graceful, and when they met his, a quiet electricity passed between them. It was not frightening, not aggressive, but it was undeniable. A sensation that seemed to communicate something words could never capture. He looked at her, unsure how to respond. There was a tension in the air, a mix of curiosity and caution. The guards remained at a distance, standing perfectly still, their attention unwavering but respectful. They had been trained to intervene at any sign of danger, yet they did nothing. It was as if even they understood that this moment was not to be disturbed, that it was sacred in a way that transcended protocol. The Queen's gaze held him, steady and unwavering, and he could feel her silently asking for something: trust, understanding, or perhaps acknowledgement. He hesitated, aware that every movement, every thought mattered in this strange, delicate dance. Slowly, he allowed himself to respond, matching her calm, letting the contact linger. The warmth of her hands was subtle, but unmistakable, a reminder that connection was possible even across worlds, even across species. As their hands remained linked, he noticed the small gestures, the slight tilt of her head, the gentle pressure of her fingers, the way her eyes searched his, not for answers, but for honesty. It was a language without words, a silent conversation that conveyed far more than speech ever could. And in that silence, he began to understand that this was not merely a gesture of greeting or politeness. It was a bridge, a bond, something that linked them in a way that could not be broken lightly. He could feel his own heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. He had faced life-or-death situations countless times, but this, the intimacy of trust, the weight of connection, was entirely new. It demanded attention, awareness, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Yet vulnerability, he realized, was not weakness. Here, it was strength. To meet her gaze, to hold her hands, was to acknowledge a shared understanding, a silent respect that went beyond the boundaries of his previous experience. The Queen spoke softly, her words careful, deliberate, and full of meaning. She told him that in her world, the act of holding hands was not simply a gesture. It was a symbol of commitment, recognition, and trust. It was rare for her to offer such a gesture, and even rarer for someone outside her people to receive it. The weight of her words sank in slowly, filling him with awe. He had been called back for a mission, but this personal acknowledgement, was something entirely different. It was a reminder that his actions had consequences far beyond the battlefield, far beyond immediate survival. He tried to process it all, struggling to put feelings into words. There was gratitude, yes, but also a strange sense of wonder. He had never imagined that a mission could lead to this. an encounter that was not about duty alone but about mutual recognition and trust. He thought back to his own experiences, to the countless choices he had made, often under pressure, often in fear. And he realized that this moment, these hands clasped together across worlds, was a culmination of all those experiences. It was as if everything he had done had led him here, to this quiet, powerful moment of understanding. The Queen's hands remained steady, her touch firm but gentle. He could feel the subtle movements, the slight shifts in pressure, and the rhythm of her gestures that spoke volumes. There was patience in her touch, a deliberate effort to communicate without words, to create a space where honesty, vulnerability, and trust could exist without judgment. He marveled at the complexity of it, at how a simple act could carry so much meaning, and at how his own responses were shaping the dialogue without a single spoken word. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The room, the chamber, and even the air itself seemed attuned to their presence. He noticed small details, the flicker of lights that seemed to respond to their movement, the gentle hum of the environment, and the way the Queen's gaze never wavered. Everything felt deliberate, intentional, and yet natural. He realized that this was not just a meeting, it was an experience designed to forge understanding, to create a bond that could not be achieved through mere conversation or diplomacy. He remembered the officer's words before he returned, the sense of urgency, the importance of his skills. And yet, in this moment, he understood that the mission was only part of the story. The true challenge was not the external dangers, the unpredictable outcomes, or even the alien technology. It was the personal connection, the silent acknowledgement of value and trust between him and the Queen. The mission had brought him here, but the bond he was forming would define much more than the success of a single task. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Queen allowed a slight change in the gesture. Her hands loosened just a little, but the connection remained. It was not a release, but a subtle acknowledgement of balance, a recognition that trust and intimacy could exist without overwhelming control. He felt a deep sense of relief, not because the pressure was gone, but because he understood that the bond had been established, that the moment had been shared, and that it carried meaning far beyond the immediate mission. He took a deep breath, allowing himself to relax slightly while still remaining fully aware. He realized that this was a turning point, not only in his mission, but in his own perception of what it meant to engage with another being, to bridge worlds, and to find understanding in the most unexpected of places. The Queen's hands were not simply holding his, they were shaping a connection, a trust, and a shared understanding that would carry forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. As he stepped back slightly, the Queen's gaze remained fixed on him, steady and unwavering. The subtle warmth of her presence lingered, a reminder that this was only the beginning of a deeper journey. He felt a mix of humility and awe, a recognition that this moment had changed him in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. The mission, the dangers and the challenges would continue, but the bond he had formed here would stay with him, guiding him, shaping him, and reminding him that connection, true connection, was sometimes more powerful than any technology, any weapon, or any strategy he could employ. With that silent understanding, he knew that he was ready to continue. Whatever awaited him next, he would face it with the knowledge that he was not alone, that a trust had been established, and that some bonds transcended worlds, languages, and expectations. The Queen's hands, still lingering in memory, had left an impression he would never forget, a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments are quiet, subtle, and shared without words. The Queen finally spoke again, her voice steady, calm, and filled with weight. He listened carefully, sensing that every word mattered more than anything he had heard before. She told him that the reason she could not let go of his hands was not merely symbolic. His presence, his decisions during the previous mission had done far more than anyone knew. He had acted in ways that had preserved not only lives but the future of her people, a fragile alliance that would shape events for generations. He blinked in surprise, hardly able to grasp the depth of her words. He had thought he was simply completing a mission, following orders and doing his duty. He had not considered that his choices, each small decision he had made under pressure, had consequences far beyond what he could see. The Queen's calm explanation made him realize how connected everything was. Every moment, every action, and every decision could ripple across worlds. She explained in detail how a misunderstanding on a neighboring planet had almost triggered a conflict. Only because of his careful negotiation, his bravery in facing danger, and his quick thinking had the situation been avoided. Many lives were saved, including those of her closest advisors and allies. She emphasized that without his intervention, the consequences could have been catastrophic. He had acted with courage, skill, and clarity when others might have faltered, and for that, she owed him both gratitude and trust. The weight of her acknowledgement pressed on him. He felt humility, pride, and disbelief all at once. He had done what he thought was necessary, often without thinking of the consequences beyond the immediate mission. And yet, here she was, telling him that his actions had shaped the future in ways he could never have imagined. The realization was overwhelming, yet inspiring. He tried to respond, to say something worthy of her words, but the truth was that words felt insufficient. How could he explain that he had acted simply because it was the right thing to do, because there was no other choice in the moment? How could he convey that the recognition she gave him, though humbling, was also deeply meaningful? He realized that some things could not be captured in speech. They had to be felt, understood, and acknowledged quietly through presence and trust. The Queen's hands remained linked with his, a subtle but constant reminder of the connection between them. She explained that in her culture, such a gesture represented the deepest form of acknowledgement, a recognition that went beyond gratitude or ceremony. It was trust, respect, and a bond that could influence the future. By keeping her hands in his, she was signaling that she believed in him completely, that she trusted him not just as an ally, but as someone whose integrity and courage mattered. He absorbed her words slowly, feeling a mixture of awe and responsibility. He had faced danger countless times, but now he understood that true responsibility went beyond surviving missions. It was about understanding the consequences of his choices, the impact of his actions, and the importance of building trust. The Queen's gesture, the bond she offered, and her words had made it clear that the mission was never just about objectives or orders. It was about people, alliances, and the delicate balance of trust that could hold worlds together. As she continued, she shared insights into her own life, her leadership, the weight of decisions she carried, and the challenges she faced in protecting her people. He listened with rapt attention, recognizing that she too bore responsibilities that were immense, perhaps even heavier than his own. For a long time, he simply absorbed her words, understanding that her transparency was a gift. She was not merely explaining the mission. She was allowing him to see her world, her struggles, and the reasons behind her trust. The more she spoke, the more he realized the depth of the bond forming between them. It was no longer just about a mission or duty. It was about understanding, respect, and a shared awareness that their actions had consequences beyond themselves. He felt a sense of purpose that went deeper than any he had known. He understood that his journey was intertwined with hers, that the trust they had established could shape not just a mission, but the future of entire civilizations. Finally, the Queen gave him a moment of silence, allowing him to absorb everything. He felt the weight of her hands, the sincerity in her gaze, and the quiet power of her presence. It was a moment of understanding that went beyond words, a recognition of the courage, humility, and integrity that had brought him here. He realized that the mission, the challenges, and even the danger were secondary to the connection they had formed. Trust, he understood, was the most powerful force of all. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but filled with quiet determination. He thanked her, not just for her words, but for her trust and acknowledgement. He knew that he had responsibilities ahead, but now he carried a deeper understanding of what they truly meant. The Queen's recognition had changed something fundamental in him. He felt prepared, focused, and more aware of the impact of his actions than ever before. The moment lingered in the air like a quiet promise. He knew that the mission would continue, that challenges would arise, but he also knew that the bond with the Queen would guide him, strengthen him, and remind him of the greater purpose behind every decision. The Queen slowly loosened her grip, just enough to signal that the moment had reached a natural pause, but the connection between them remained. He could feel the subtle energy of trust and understanding lingering in the space between them. It was not a release, but a continuation of acknowledgement, a quiet promise that their bond would endure beyond the chamber, beyond the mission, and beyond even the immediate circumstances. He stepped back slightly, taking a moment to absorb everything. The room, the lights, the subtle hum of the environment, all of it seemed to affirm the significance of what had just transpired. He had been called back for duty, yet what he had received here was far more profound. The Queen's acknowledgement, her trust, and her willingness to share her world had given him a deeper sense of purpose than any mission could alone. As he prepared to leave, he reflected on everything he had experienced during his journey, the danger, the decisions, the uncertainty, and now this rare connection. He realized that missions were only part of the story. The real measure of success was not survival or accolades, but the relationships, bonds, and trust he built along the way. He understood now that these connections could influence outcomes far more than strategy or technology alone. Walking through the corridors back to his shuttle, he noticed details he had not seen before. The quiet precision of the walls, the gentle shift of light in response to movement, and the way the space seemed alive yet orderly. Every element of the environment reflected the intelligence, care, and awareness of the beings who had created it. And within this space, he felt a profound respect, not just for the Queen, but for the world she represented, the lives she protected, and the trust she had placed in him. He boarded the shuttle, feeling the familiar hum of engines as they prepared to depart. The stars stretched out before him, vast and endless, but his thoughts were rooted in what he had just experienced. He understood that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that he carried with him something far more important than any equipment or training. He carried trust, understanding, and a connection that would guide him through whatever lay ahead. As the shuttle lifted off, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought about the Queen's hands, the weight of her gaze, and the words she had shared. He realized that true courage was not only about facing danger, but also about embracing vulnerability, building trust, and acknowledging the impact of one's actions. These lessons would stay with him forever, shaping not only the remainder of his mission but the rest of his life. Returning to his quarters later, he reviewed the mission details once more, but his mind kept returning to the Queen, the bond they had formed, and the trust she had placed in him. He felt a sense of responsibility, yes, but also of empowerment. He was not merely an agent of duty, he was a part of something larger, something interconnected, and he understood that his actions could ripple across worlds in ways he could never have imagined. In the quiet of the night, he allowed himself to think about the future, not just the mission, but what lay beyond it. The Queen's trust had changed him, opening his mind to new possibilities and his heart to the significance of connection. He understood that the true success of a mission was not measured by the immediate outcome, but by the bonds forged, the lives touched, and the trust earned. Finally, he rested, knowing that he had been changed by the experience. The mission would continue, challenges would arise, but he carried with him a newfound strength. He was prepared not just to act, but to understand, to trust, and to honor the connections that mattered most. And deep inside, he knew that this bond with the Queen, a gesture as simple yet profound as holding hands, would guide him through the unknown, shaping his decisions, his perspective, and the story that was still unfolding before him.